You are listening to Inspired Caring with Michelle Magner, episode number 157. Hello, welcome to Inspired Caring. I'm your host, Michelle Magner. If you are caring for an older family member, this is the podcast for you. Each week, I bring insight, tips, inspiration, and strategies to help you care for the people that you love without losing yourself along the way. Having cared for both of my grandmothers, I've helped manage everything from hospital stays, households full of belongings, to navigating senior living and end-of-life care. And I've worked in senior living as a result of that experience, serving my residents and their families as they've been on this journey too. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you enjoy this episode of Inspired Caring. I am delighted to have Mary Lou Falcone on the podcast today. Welcome, Mary Lou.
Thank you very much, Michelle. It's a pleasure to be here.
Your life has been much impacted by Lewy body dementia. So that is what we are going to talk about today. And I would love for you to just share with what is your story? How did dementia touch your life and who did you care for? So we can go back as far as you would like.
Okay. Well, my caregiving life started when I was 10 years old. And it started caring for my father, who had a massive stroke and didn't speak after that stroke. And so I became a caregiver for my dad and my siblings. But we fast forward to the caregiving for the love of my life. And that was my late husband, Nicky Zann, who was an artist, a very celebrated, internationally known artist, and also in the 50s had been a rocker. So music factored into it. He was a for real rocker on the road with Johnny Cash and Jerry Lee Lewis and Patsy Cline. So Nicky had a very wild and storied and incredibly rich life, and we did together. What happened was that in 2016, I began to see signs of behavior that just wasn't Nicky. And by 2019, we had a diagnosis of Lewy body dementia. And then the roller coaster ride started because Lewy body dementia, unlike Alzheimer's, fluctuates. That's the basic difference between them. Alzheimer's has a steady decline, as everyone knows, and Lewy body dementia has this effect of going in and out. One day your loved one will know exactly who you are, will be 100% himself or herself, and then the next day won't even recognize you.
Oh my goodness.
And no two cases manifest the same way. So it makes it very difficult to diagnose. And although it's not rare, because 1.4 million Americans have Lewy body dementia, and worldwide it's upward of 11 million people. So that's a big number for something that is not particularly well known. Again, not rare, but not well known. So the big dementia umbrella has spokes that come off of it. Among them are Alzheimer's and Lewy body and frontotemporal, and the list goes on.
Lewy body seems to be one of the most challenging dementias for caregivers and people to be living with and manage. It feels, I think, hallucinations and paranoia are two of the top symptoms that we struggle with the most. And can you just expand a little bit about that? Just what are some of those differences?
Yes, I absolutely can. Let me do it by example, because when I first noticed that something was happening with Nicky, it was 2016, the fall of 2016. And what I noticed was great fatigue, great confusion, the inability to finish sentences, and handwriting that got smaller and smaller, in addition to spending like a half hour to write one check. That was not Nicky, who was vivacious and with it and on top of his game in every way. So these were what we noticed initially. Later, what came into play was something called REM sleep disorder, which is when you're asleep, when we sleep, we dream, but we don't act out our dreams. Our legs don't go or our fists don't go. With REM sleep disorder, which is part of Lewy body dementia, your loved one will act out his dream so that if he's dreaming he's punching someone, he actually may be punching you. That's one aspect. The hallucinations are a huge part of Lewy body dementia that does not appear in Alzheimer's. So that's another very strong aspect. And the third are the fluctuations, the cognitive fluctuations. Again, your loved one being 100% himself one day, nobody would know anything was wrong. And the next day being so into, as I would say, Lewy would take over. It wasn't Nicky, it was Lewy. And Lewy had this ability to take over and completely take the personality away.
I appreciate that you actually named the disease process. It's almost like a flip personality, like it was this whole other person, because I think just in our family, that was one of the biggest struggles for my family when my mother-in-law, who had frontotemporal dementia, when she was acting out of character. I'm so fragile with this language because it's evolving in our community, but so she would just not be acting herself, and instead of blaming the disease, it's so easy to want to blame the person when it really is a brain state difference.
You've just hit something really important, and that is you have to join the person where they are. You can't expect them to come to you in their former state. It's just not possible. And so the compassion that you bring to it is actually suspending what you need and giving what they need. Incredibly important. And it's hard. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's an easy thing to do. It's not. You know that from having gone through it. But what it does is it allows you to enter a new world. And it's something that is not easy. It is not pleasant. It is not what you expect in life. You get to a certain stage and you think, well, we're going to live happily ever after.
Right.
In many ways you do, but differently.
It's almost like a day-to-day improv class or an hour by hour improv class where you are trying to meet them where they are at. I think there was a couple who did a TED on this where they literally they were both actors, improv comedians, and they ran through a scene as we have high, strict standard expectations. And then they ran back through the scene as if it was an improv class.
That is so perfect because caregiving is improvisation. Day in and day out. There's no way you can train for it. There's no way you can read books that are going to tell you exactly what to do and when to do it and how to do it. You really have to employ everything you've ever known in life, bring it into the mix, and do your very best. Are you going to succeed all the time? No, you're not. Because we're human and we're fragile. And sometimes, we have it up to here, up to the top of our heads, and you want to just scream. And what I used to recommend in caregiving groups is that you take a pillow, you go into another room where your loved one can't see or hear you. You take a pillow and you scream into the pillow. Now, I can tell you that darn and heck and damn don't work. But what works is the F word, loud and clear, but into the pillow. And what happens is it actually must release endorphins or something, but it releases the stress. And then I would recommend taking a lavender sachet. I have them made by this very wonderful woman, French lavender in a beautiful sachet, and you squeeze it and you inhale it like a yoga breath. Everything calms. I can guarantee it works. When I used to share this in support groups, everybody would laugh. And I would say, please go try it and then tell me if it's funny. It's not. It really works. I guarantee.
Well, our nervous system needs some sort of release. It needs
Correct.
it's like a pressure cooker, and that valve being hit to release it. And then I love the follow-up with the lavender, which can help reset, and the deep breath, because we know that breath can help tap into that parasympathetic nervous system.
Exactly. And it seems so simple, right? It's such a simple fix, but it really does recharge the battery so you can walk back in and smile and not take it out on the person who can't help what's going on. I mean, nobody asks for this. Nobody in their right mind would ever wish this on
Right.
anyone. And so it's really important that when you're with your loved one, that you have as much joy as you can bring into that room, because they will feel everything. Sometimes people aren't able to express, they're not able to tell you what they're thinking or feeling. But I am sure, absolutely sure, that what you bring in, that gentle touch, that kiss on the cheek, that hug, all of those things are felt. And so is your anger.
Mm.
So if you bring anger into the room, you're going to make the situation much more tense than it needs to be. And again, that person can't help what's going on. You can control what you're feeling and bring some light into the situation. But the person who's going through it can only feel what you're giving them.
I've I've even felt like you can walk into a room where an argument maybe has just occurred, and you can like feel that energy within the room, even if you weren't part of it or there for it. You can just there's like a energetic hangover in there.
You're so right, so right. And so our responsibility as caregivers is to bring as much positive energy as we can into a situation. Now, that's very easy to say, and it's very hard to do.
Mhm.
And so when you fall short of the mark, and you will, I guarantee you will, what you need to do is to forgive yourself, because you can't be 100% of the time the perfect person. Not one of us can do that. Might like to.
What are some of the thoughts that we can have to forgive ourselves? Because it feels like, in theory, throughout our really, if you reflect upon your whole life, there's a lot of opportunity for forgiveness for yourself and for other people. So as we step into this space of forgiveness, what would be something we could offer people?
I think a feeling that we can always try again.
Mm.
You can always do a redo. I like to think back to my 10-year-old self. My 10-year-old self, who was told by a rehabilitation center that after the insurance money ran out, that I could work with my dad who had had the stroke, and I could actually do the speech therapy. By that time, I was 11 years old. And my 11-year-old self, a child feels like, I can make this happen. I can help my dad. I can make it work.
Mm.
And of course, when it's physically impossible, and it was because the brain was too damaged, I couldn't do it. But I willed it. I kept at it and at it. What I brought to my adult self was the forgiveness that I was a child. I didn't really know any better. I
Mm.
just wanted it to happen. But as an adult, I got a redo, and this time for my husband, Nicky.
Mm.
And so what my dad didn't get from me, but he understood it, I am sure, my husband did. And that was a patience that I learned. I didn't have it as a child. I learned it as an adult. And I forgave myself.
Mm.
Writing this book that I wrote, which is I Didn't See It Coming, Scenes of Love, Loss, and Lewy Body Dementia. In writing this book, I sat and wept as I wrote many of these passages. I wept for my child self. I wept for my adult self. I wept for the people that I touched during those periods. And I brought in a sense of forgiveness. for not having the tools as a youngster, but learning the tools as an adult.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And as we are on this journey caring for someone who's living with dementia, we are continually learning. So, what I'm hearing is that there was really some mindful, present moment sitting in those feelings and just allowing of those feelings to run through your body as you were writing, to just be really present with what had happened and where things were at that time. And then after having those present mindful moments, you were able to offer yourself some grace and there was some acceptance, I guess, is what I was hearing before.
Absolutely.
Acceptance before the forgiveness.
Yes, absolutely. I found that in writing, I was reliving, I was opening up, and I was becoming something that I had not been, and that is vulnerable.
Mm.
Vulnerability is huge, and I didn't realize it. I was the go-to person. In real life, for 50 years, is a publicist in classical music, taking care of the careers of others. It's another form of caregiving,
Yeah.
making their lives shine as they should, because they were phenomenal performers and institutions. And in that, I was the go-to person. I was the problem solver. I was a spotlight person, working
Right.
the spotlight. And vulnerability was not part of the equation. In writing this book, I learned to be vulnerable. And now when I go out on speaking engagements about Lewy body dementia, the comment that I hear most often from audience members who come back afterwards is, thank you for being vulnerable, because you allowed us to be vulnerable.
Hmm.
And it didn't occur to me that that's what I was doing until they told me. But when I realized that that was the messaging, being open, being vulnerable, I also realized something that Nicky and I had talked about when he was first diagnosed, which is, do you tell people about the disease? Do you tell them what you're going through? Or, like many people do you try to shield it and hide it? Our collective decision, and we made the decision together because Nicky was lucid at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Our together decision was, yes, we will share. Why? Because people need to know what's going on so that they, when they wish and choose to, can join you in the journey and not be afraid of it, and not be afraid to be helpful in ways that they couldn't know unless you told them.
Right. Because when you withhold that information, I mean, we are all so connected in community with one another and relationship with one another. And when that information is withheld and people pull back, it's very disheartening and confusing. And they're experiencing this relationship change in a way that is unexpected. And it's not that people, I think, deserve to know why, but I think we deserve to have their support.
Exactly. And support can only be there if you invite it in. People are not going to invade your privacy. And if they're seeing behavior that's not what they're used to from someone, what is inevitable is that they're going to talk about it behind the scenes. And I don't mean being cruel. I don't mean being disrespectful. I mean human nature.
Right.
What's going on with Nicky? What's happening? He's not himself. And that's not fair to them either, to withhold, because if they wish to participate, to be supportive, to be with you, to go on the journey with you, they need to know. Now, that said, I will also add that not everybody can do it. Not everybody can join you on the journey. Not everyone will. And as the caregiver, you want their support, but you don't always want to ask for it.
Right.
It's hard to ask for support. Sometimes you have to, in cases where your loved one is saying, I want to see my sister, and the sister is not responding. Well, sometimes you have to go to the sister and say, I need your help. I need your support.
Mhm.
Sometimes you get it, and sometimes you don't. It depends on what they're able to give. At the end of the day, those who can give, you bless and embrace, and so you're so grateful for it. Those who can't, one needs to learn to forgive the fact that they can't.
Right. There has to be some openness and fluidity with how that support is given and different people's strengths.
Yes, and
Yeah.
if you don't have the strength, then you don't have it. One can't expect it, and you just have to learn that that's the case and move on from it, but not take it personally and not internalize it. That's very hard, especially when
Mhm.
it's family who can't deal. And a lot of family members can't deal. They're not, for some reason, not equipped,
Right.
not able to go there.
Well,
That's tough.
it is so tough. And, back in the day, we all lived much tighter in closer proximity. We lived, so there was a lot more buffering where it wasn't as stand out, where the caregiver strain or burden was mostly on one person. And then other people were being asked, or I don't know, it just when we were in community together back in the 30s and 40s, um, it, it wasn't as notable when people were not able or present to be helpful.
Well, also, I'm a child of the 50s. I grew up in the 1940s, late 40s and 50s. And in the 1950s, and especially in an Italian American family, which I was part of, you didn't talk about what was going on inside the home outside. You just
Okay.
didn't bring it. So people didn't know what was happening. And emotionally, as part of that family, emotionally, I knew I mustn't talk about it. But what I discovered was I had a singing voice. That was my gift.
Mhm.
And I used that voice to emotionally express what I was feeling, so much so that adults in the room would weep. And it was because I was communicating, but I wasn't violating any family mores. I wasn't doing what I wasn't supposed to do, which was talk about it. Although no one ever said don't, it was just understood.
Right.
You didn't, right? So emotionally, I could sing and I was expressing, and obviously people were feeling what I was expressing, but I wasn't breaking the rules.
Mm.
And that, of course, for me was a huge gift. I take no credit for it. It was the gift that was given to me. I then parlayed that gift into a career as an opera singer from my 20s and 20 to 28, and then discovered that really my gift was communicating behind the scenes. And that's the gift that I developed into a public relations business. But the gift was always communicating. So whether it was through singing or through speech, it was communication that was the
Mm.
lifeline.
Which with Lewy body dementia, we know that is one of the biggest struggles is
Yes, is
communication.
communicating. And
Yeah.
when that communicating is stops, that is the verbal communication stops, there are aspects that don't stop. The loving doesn't stop.
Mhm.
The tenderness doesn't stop. The care from the person who has Lewy body about the caregiver doesn't stop. It is a two-way street. It is not a one-way street. And maybe you don't hear it, maybe you don't hear the words, but if you look, if you bear witness, you will feel it.
Mm.
So it's not all doom and gloom. It's tough. I mean, we went through it during the pandemic. So I became the sole caregiver because I couldn't bring anyone in. It was too dangerous. And there are those who have said, well, that was so tough. Yes and no. It was actually, again, I keep talking about gifts, but this was a gift. I was given the gift of strength to
Mm-hmm.
be able to physically handle this. Also, an emotional strength that allowed me to be with Nicky 24/7. I could do my work at midnight. I could come over to my computer and do my work at midnight. Nobody knew the difference. It was fine. But I could be there for him when he needed it. And I could monitor slightly from a distance. For instance, someone with Lewy body, as you know, has trouble dressing, putting on their clothing, all of that. And showering, and it would take Nicky 2 hours to do that. I would peek around the corner to make sure he wasn't struggling too much. But whatever he could do, I let happen because there was still that sense of dignity. And one of the things that Nicky said to me when he was diagnosed, he said three things, which are, I think, worth repeating. The first was, I have always wanted to meet your father, and now I'll have my chance. And that was his way of letting me know he was dying. The second thing he said, I live by every morning of my life, which is, we have had a great run. We cannot be sad. What a beautiful message to leave with me. And the third was a request, which is, I know that the sledding is going to get tough. Please help me to keep my dignity. And that's something that I say to all caregivers out there, that allowing your loved one to keep his or her dignity is so vital, because your loved one is there. They are there. They're feeling it all. Not able to express often, but able to feel. And so keeping dignity is paramount. And it's everything from when we had to get a wheelchair. I called it the chair with wheels. I never called it a wheelchair. I also told a little white lie, and that I said to Nicky, this is a gift from our beloved doctor, which I knew he would accept. If he knew that I'd gone down to our pharmacy to buy it, it would have never been accepted. And then the dignity of, let's wheel it out together. And waiting until we were in a secluded place in a little park for him to sit in it, get comfortable in it. Do you want to continue in it? Yes, he thought he would. But coming back into the building, would you like to get out of the chair and walk in the building? Which he could still do, just couldn't go the distance. But ultimately, he said, no, it's fine. Because he had the choice. The
Right.
dignity belonged to him.
That is beautiful. And that is
It's a,
something I think we can all learn from with all of our relationships, is a little extra grace, a little extra patience, a little
yes,
extra reframeworking instead of coming directly at something.
exactly. And not making the decisions,
Right.
giving a choice, not 10 choices, 2 choices. Would you like to do X or would you like to do Z? No Y in there. Just 2 choices that you know the person can handle. And if they're not able to handle choice, you make the suggestion. How about if we do whatever it is? And make it an assent from them. They can say yes, or
Is
they can say
Nicky,
no.
or they can say no. Is he
Yeah.
alive or is he deceased?
Oh no, Nicky died in 2020.
Okay.
And it's worth sharing that just maybe a month and a half before he died, he wrote a poem describing his descent into Lewy body dementia and being taken over by Lewy. And it is one of the most poignant and heart-wrenching things I've ever read in my life. I included in the book that I wrote because it is an apt description of what someone is going through. And that roller coaster was part of what was going on. Toward the end, in the last week of his life, when we had hospice here, and I brought, and when he stopped drinking, the day he stopped drinking, he stopped eating. 2 days later, he stopped drinking. And I asked all of our loved ones and close friends to come and say their goodbyes, which they did. And there were about 8 people who came in one at a time to say goodbye to him in our bedroom. Everyone was gathered in the living room, and I heard a voice. Now, Nicky hadn't been talking. And I went in, and he said very clearly, I want to get up. I want to go into the living room. Put a robe on him, put him in the little transport chair, wheeled him into the living room, whereupon he said goodbye and thank you by name to every person in that room. It took about 4 or 5 minutes. After that, he looked at me and he said, I'm very tired. I have to go back. And went back to bed. I realized that as long as I was bringing people in to say their goodbyes, he was not going to rest. He was going to rally and become the host.
Mhm.
And so a day and a half later, I just cut off all visits and allowed him to transition in his own peaceful way. And when he did, I was holding his hand, took his last breath, and it was an absolutely beautiful moment. It wasn't sad because his suffering was over
Mm.
and he could be at peace. It was a very beautiful moment.
What gave you the strength to recognize that that was what he needed? I think so often family members are fighting against that. Like they want to keep the people
Yeah.
coming, they want to keep the person holding on for longer. Where did you find that space to recognize this is what he needs in order to make the transition and to allow for the transition in your mind?
Yeah, I believe in the power of prayer, as did Nicky. And so I used prayer and meditation and a lot. I also believe in faith, my faith.
Mm.
It doesn't matter what you believe in, just something larger than yourself. And I believe in something much larger than myself. And so I was able to draw on an inner strength that allowed me to allow him to leave with dignity.
Mm. That's so powerful.
It's soul searching. You go inside, and again, it's not about you.
Mhm.
It's not about what you want. I mean, if I had had a choice, I would want Nicky walking beside me for the rest of my natural life. But
Right.
that wasn't to be. And in moments of grief, grief has to come out. You have to go with it. But it doesn't need to be your nemesis. It can be your catharsis.
And it's so fluid. Grief, it's just
Oh,
it's like an ocean. You just don't know when the waves are going to hit you, and you don't know when it's going to be calm, and it's just not linear.
that's absolutely right. And that wave can be like a tsunami, and then it can just go right out to sea, and tranquility comes in again. But what you don't know is when the next wave is going to hit.
Right.
And it does. It simply does. It's the way it goes. But it's a way of, for me, the grief was expressed through writing. I was able to grieve thoroughly, fully, not completely, because it's still, I'll hear a song and the tears will just come.
Mm.
But they're tears of joy. They're not tears of sadness. They're tears of what was beautiful. It's a remembrance.
Yeah.
Sometimes grief is simply a remembrance.
And you did not have an intention to write a book. Is that what pulled through
No,
for you? Like Is that why you wrote the book?
I wrote the book because I felt this need for Lewy body dementia to be understood.
Mm.
And when I wrote it, I front loaded the whole book with Lewy body dementia all the time. And a very wise editor said to me, if you want a general public to pay attention to this disease, you have to bring us into it. You cannot bombard us with it. And so what I suggest, said she, is that you open up, take off the gloves, open your heart, and tell us who you are, who Nicky was, what your life was like, and then bring us into Lewy body dementia. And that's what I did. I did it with intent. And I know that, it gets mixed reactions. Sometimes people will say, well, who does she think she is, just talking about herself, blah, 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 blah. Actually, I'm not. I'm talking about a universality. What I've experienced in life, others have too. And the reactions that I'm partial to are the people who say, I saw myself in what you said. And that was the intent. The intent was, this is about us. It's not I, me, and my, which is why I choose to write in the voices of many people who were incredible mentors in my life. And I let them tell my story. And I went back through correspondence, through a variety of ways to get to that emotional side from them through me to a public. It's a device. That's simply all it is, to get you to the point where you've laughed, you've shed a few tears, but you've laughed mainly as you're reading. And then you get to the hard part. The last third is the journey into Lewy body and through Lewy body and through death from Lewy body.
Mm. Do you identify as a caregiver? I think our identity around that word can be a really big challenge. How did you use the word caregiver throughout the book?
I identify totally as a caregiver. My entire life, I realize I'm 78 years old now. So for 78 years, I have done some form of caregiving. And it is a mission. It is part of my DNA.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was put on earth to do, to help other people through caring and giving that care freely, openly, as hopefully generously as I can, and giving back. I'm a person who has been blessed, very blessed. And I feel that when you've had so many wonderful opportunities in life, that it is important when you can and where you can to give back to others.
So it sounds like you broke apart the word, and universally we are hopefully all care givers of care
And caring
and
about
caring,
something more than yourself.
right?
Yeah.
What a generous thing, truly, to share your story and Nicky's story through the book, because it is so emotionally charged and private. And I think that that is what partially keeps us so isolated, is this desire to provide dignity to somebody. So then we shut down and we keep things held in and private. And so it feels like this fine line between letting people in to what's really happening behind the scenes with the disease processes,
It's
maintaining
interesting.
dignity.
Yeah, you say that. I probably, before I wrote this book, was one of the most private people on the planet. I was well known, but no one knew me. That was by design. And now there is no privacy because I've absolutely torn it wide open, but that was also by design and necessity. I felt that if I was going to make a difference in the world of Lewy body dementia awareness, that I needed to come forth with as much honesty and openness as I humanly could.
Mm.
And I did, we have I smile, there's a bench in Central Park with Nicky's, it's in memory of Nicky. And I went to that bench and I put my hand on the plaque and I said, is it okay? Is what I've written okay, Nicky? Before I publish it, I just need a sign. And Michelle, the sign was, my shoulders went down. I felt this calm and sense of peace, and I knew it was okay.
Mm. Completely dialed into your body, your intuition, your gut, and then being open to
Yeah.
receiving that message.
And why was it okay? Because it was going to help caregivers know they are never alone. Even though you feel isolated and alone as that caregiver, you're not. And that's my message. You're not alone. We're with you.
So even as you're stepping down your path privately with your own family member, trying to keep the wheels on the bus and logistics, just knowing that there is this connection that you have with other people who have walked this path that are in front of you or behind you.
Yes. Yeah. I will tell you a very quick story. Saturday, I was at the ballet, 3,000 people in State Theater in New York. And at intermission, I'm sitting very quietly by, minding my own business, not saying a word. And the person I was with was also rather quiet. And a woman came up and I thought she wanted to come into the row. And she looked at me and she said, "You're the Lewy body lady." And I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "I just want to say thank you for your advice. It's been so helpful." That was it. And I was stunned, but so gratified because, I said when I wrote this book, if I help one other person, then I have done something right. And there was this person actually telling me that she had been helped. What a gift. What
Do
an
you think
incredible gift.
do you think Nicky sent her?
I do. I do. I mean, I do. I feel his presence all the time in so many things, in writing this book, in sharing it, in lecturing around the country, in telling some of the underbelly of it. I was at the Mayo Clinic in November at a palliative care conference for nurses at which I spoke. And I felt that it was okay to talk about all of those things that happen when someone is no longer able to care for himself. And it was blessed. It was endorsed. It was okay.
Mary Lee, you have this beautiful, rich fullness of legacy with music and the work that you did around music and supporting all of those artists in your own career. And then now this is just such the cherry on top, maybe, of your legacy.
This is act 3.
Act
You know,
three.
I always wondered what act 3 would be. Act 1 was performing. Act 2 was actually giving care to other people's careers, being a publicist. And act 3 is being an advocate for Lewy body dementia awareness in general, but Lewy body in specific.
What should be someone's first step if they're hearing this and obviously they've bought the book, so they're waiting for that to be delivered, and then what are some things that should be on someone's radar that would indicate it's time to maybe make a doctor's appointment?
If you're seeing behavior that just has not been present before, forgetfulness, fatigue, anger issues, those are signs that something, it could be stress. I mean, all right, it could be stress, but if it's just normal day-to-day living and no added stress, I would recommend that what I asked for was a baseline MRI. That was to rule out whether there were strokes or mini strokes or anything like that going on. Once that was ruled out, I said, what next? Because I needed a what next. And our brilliant doctor sent us to a great neurologist. They did a cognitive test, the general standard test that one takes, and watched Nicky walk and said, this is Lewy body dementia with Parkinsonian aspects. Shocking, because it's very rare to get the diagnosis on the first try. People sometimes wait years of frustration before they get a proper diagnosis. It's generally misdiagnosed. But then they followed up with something called a REM sleep disorder test, which showed that he had REM sleep disorder activity, and also something called a DAT scan, DAT scan, which is like an MRI, except they inject dye and they can see where the Lewy bodies are in the brain. Those were the tests in 2019 that were used. Today, there is relatively new a skin test where they take a biopsy from just a patch of skin from the back of the neck, the back of the knee, and the back of the ankle. And from that, they can tell if Lewy bodies are present. That's a huge discovery. So hopeful things are happening. We have to have hope. It's slow, but awareness comes first. With awareness, you can then bring the dollars in that are going to do the research. With the proper research, you're going to find something to slow it down. After that, you're going to find a cure. That's the trajectory. And I'm very fond of saying, if anybody out there is of celebrity status and has this in their family, or you are the person who can come forth, please do, because if you look at frontotemporal dementia and what the family of Bruce Willis has done, it is tremendous putting a light on that. And Robin Williams was diagnosed posthumously in autopsy as having been riddled with Lewy body dementia, but he didn't know that because he'd been misdiagnosed. So we all know that celebrity does bring attention. And so I always put this forth when I have the opportunity. If you're there, if you can, if you're willing, please come forward.
Thank you so much for highlighting that, because our family with my mother-in-law, she lived with frontotemporal dementia. And when Emma came forward about Bruce's diagnosis, I felt seen, I think,
Yes. Yes.
almost for the first time. Like, as a family member, you're just behind the scenes waiting, waving your red flags. And so it just felt like her community felt like my community, if that makes sense. Like,
It certainly does.
yes.
Because again, you're not alone.
Right.
You are not alone. And the importance of that can't be stressed enough. So we need community. We need people who will speak up, who will speak out, who will embrace us.
Yeah.
And it takes courage. It's not easy, but it is so important. And it is a loving and responsible thing to do if you can do it.
Well, I'm very grateful to you for being here today, for elevating the message about Lewy body dementia. I have an aunt who lived with Lewy body dementia for several years, and it's just it was scary because it felt new, it felt unknown. And I think that your work and what you're doing and the book that you've done and how you are speaking around the world about it is a massive part of the solution. So thank you.
You're welcome. And I will just add, we're also into a film. There's a film coming out later this year called Facing the Wind. I'm an executive producer on the film, as are Yo-Yo Ma, Renee Fleming, and David Hyde Pierce. And with this film, we highlight 3 different cases of Lewy body dementia and 3 families and the journey that they're on, showing how different it appears in different individuals. And it is an awareness film. So that will be later this year, Facing the Wind.
Oh my gosh. Can't wait.
So
Well, thank you so very much. We've covered a lot of territory. Anything else that is on your heart or you feel like people need to hear?
I think people need to hear that when they're going through what feels like the tortures of the damned,
Mm, no,
there are moments of light, there are moments of generosity of spirit, and there are moments of hope. And I think that it's important for those of us who are in the caregiving roles to keep hope and resilience in the forefront, because after all is said and done, there is hope after your loved one leaves, and you are resilient if you allow yourself to be.
that's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this opportunity, Michelle. Um, it's a gift to be able to share, and I thank you for sharing as well.
My pleasure.